So how about a few cage trapping tips? You know, cage traps aren't hardly ever my go-to trap, but it's good to have some around, especially because you never know when you might need them. If you're doing any kind of work around somebody's house, any kind of damage work, trying to catch raccoons even around your own house, especially people with pets, you know, this is the best option. It may not be the easiest way to catch the animal, but a lot of times from a public's point of view, this is what they'd rather see. They don't want to hear anything about, you know, a foothold trap or a snare or anything that they think might hurt their animal. So whenever you're trapping, it's really helpful to have at least a few cage traps for the few scenarios and the few situations where they can really come in handy. You know, one of the biggest drawbacks against them is their size. You know, they're big. You could fit 2 dozen foothold traps in here, or, you know, I don't know how many dozen snares. But like I said, they have their purpose, and when you need them, and they really shine. So, and there can be some tricks to using them. You know, the first thing, as with any trapping, is you've got to be set on sign. You got to be set where the animal's going to come by where you're trapping. If you're just sitting, hoping that your lure's going to bring an animal in, you're bound for disappointment. So in this situation, I'm sitting on an old logging road near an intersection, near a creek, somewhere where I know, you know, typically this size trap I'm targeting coons. So first thing I want to do, I want to be close to their travel way, and then I want to find something to kind of stabilize my trap. I want to set this trap. I don't just throw it, you know, throw it on the ground, set it and go. Because you see, you know, when an animal starts trying to walk in there and that trap's shaking and rolling, that animal's not going to be comfortable going in there. So the first thing I like to do is take that trap and just kind of scrape some of what actually this upper side of the tree looks a little bit flatter. So I'm going to scrape some of that away, put it right up against that tree. That's more solid. You know, and maybe by the tree it'd be a little bit more convincing for an animal, less out of place. So you know, it all depends on the animal that you're trapping as to how conspicuous or inconspicuous you may need it. So I got that, but you know, a lot of times it's helpful to anchor it further than that. So, you know, one good way to do it is just take a rebar stake and run through the wire right on the inside of the trap and shove that into the ground. That's going to stabilize it. It's also going to help, you know, it's not necessarily uncommon for a coon, a big coon, to roll this baby over. And if it does, you stand a chance of losing them. So, you know, anything you can do to anchor to that trap is worth doing. And another thing you may want to consider, instead of the rebar, is just taking a log, a hunk of wood, a rock, something, just kind of prop it up. Like I said, just give that trap some stability. Just like a foothold trap, you don't want that thing moving and shifting as the animal's walking in. All right, next thing I'm going to do, when I set the trap, I don't like this wire down here. You know, it's not going to bother all animals, but I want this to be as inviting an area as possible. So I'm going to gather up some pine straw, some leaves, whatever's around, and I'm just going to kind of cover the floor of that trap. You know, then it's not so obvious. Animal's still probably going to feel it under his feet, but it's all going to have all that other stuff under it, so I don't think it's going to be as obvious to the animal or make the animal as cautious. Another thing you need to consider is your bait, or your trap really. You know, in the back, if you've got large wire all over the trap, large holes, a coon or possum, something's liable to just reach right through and grab your bait, take it and go. A lot of the traps are made with smaller wire on the back, and some of them are made with actually little bait boxes or something of really small wire to put back there. So that's something you want to take into account. This trap is made with smaller wire on the back. Another thing you can do is, depending on what you're trapping, what you're using as bait, you can anchor that bait in the back. So maybe you're using a piece of corn cob to try to catch coons. You know, that's going to be really visual. You can put a little fish oil or something there to get their attention, draw them to there. You zip tie that corn cob in the back of the trap, or some traps have a trip mechanism that comes in from the top. So if you can tie it to that trip mechanism where they come in and they pull instead of stepping on, that can be really effective too. So that's something else you want to make sure is that animals can't get to your bait when it's in the trap. They've got to come through the trap. Another thing is when you have your trap set, it's up to you, but you may want to kind of try to blend it in. So you can put some leaves and stuff over top of it. Maybe leave the back open so an animal can see through, but make it more like a cubby set, you know. A lot of trappers use cubbies with either footholds or conibear. So cubbies are really effective. So that's something else to consider, especially if you've got an animal that seems to try to shy away from your cage traps. And then lastly, you know, right before I leave, I like to put a good clump of bait in the back. You know, I want something that's going to be really attractive, but then I like to kind of dribble it out through and even outside of the trap, so that especially with coons, you know, if he's walking around, he smells something, he can come over, and before he even gets in the trap, he tastes something that he knows he really wants. And he knows where the rest of it is. That's going to entice him all the more to go into the back of that trap and be caught and waiting on you. So that's what like I said, I like, whether you're using some kind of you know, marshmallows, mackerel, anything like that. Big clump in the back, sardines. You know, if you're using sardines, dribble that sardine juice out front. Put a little chunk of sardine right outside the cage, or you know, even out into the road. You know, if I was sitting here, I'd bait my trap, have a little bit here, and then I'd probably just take a spoonful of whatever I'm using and just kind of scatter it off in the road. And that way, the animal comes by, you know, if the wind's blowing the wrong direction, he's still probably going to smell that little piece that's in the road, stop to pick it up, and then figure out where it come from and come and get the rest of it. So that's a few cage trap tips that will help improve your cage trap catch. So good luck.